The people who change your life are rarely the ones everyone is watching. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers that seemed to float like stars above the hundreds of guests gathered for one of Boston's most prestigious charity galas. Wealth, influence, and reputation filled every corner of the room. Conversations drifted between investment deals, political connections, and philanthropic announcements. Daniel Whitmore had attended events like this for years. At 46, he was accustomed to being recognized the moment he entered a room. People sought his attention, his approval, and sometimes his money. Yet on that particular evening, none of it held his interest. Standing near the edge of the ballroom with a glass of sparkling water, he listened politely to a discussion he had already forgotten when his attention shifted toward a woman across the room. She was not surrounded by reporters. She was not trying to impress anyone. She stood beside a display table supporting literacy programs for underserved neighborhoods, speaking with a small group of teachers and volunteers. There was something striking about her calm confidence. She listened more than she spoke, and when she smiled, people seemed genuinely at ease around her. Daniel found himself watching longer than he intended. Eventually, curiosity won. He crossed the ballroom and approached the display. The woman looked up as he arrived. "Good evening," she said warmly. "Interested in community literacy?" Daniel smiled slightly. "I am interested in learning why everyone here seems more comfortable talking to you than to the celebrities." A hint of amusement appeared in her eyes. "That is easy. I am talking about books. They are talking about themselves." Daniel laughed, genuinely surprised. Most people treated him carefully. This woman spoke with complete honesty. "Fair point," he said. "Daniel Whitmore. Ava Richardson." She shook his hand without any visible reaction to his name. No sudden excitement. No attempt to impress him. No change at all. For reasons he could not explain, he found that refreshing. Over the next 30 minutes they talked about literature, neighborhood programs, and the challenges facing independent bookstores. Ava owned a small bookstore on a quiet street near the harbor. She spoke about it with obvious passion. Daniel listened far more attentively than he had during any business presentation that week. Around them, the gala continued in full force, but neither seemed interested in joining the larger crowd. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt as though someone was speaking to him rather than to the billionaire everyone else saw. As the evening progressed, guests began leaving. The event organizers prepared closing remarks. Daniel glanced toward Ava. "Would you like to continue this conversation sometime?" Ava smiled politely. Perhaps. I have found that people reveal who they are over time." Daniel chuckled. "That sounds like a challenge." "Maybe it is." Before he could respond, a volunteer approached Ava with a question. She excused herself for a moment. Daniel turned to greet another guest who had called his name. The interruption lasted less than 2 minutes. When he looked back, Ava was gone. He searched the ballroom, the lobby, even the valet area outside. She had disappeared without leaving a number, a business card, or any way to contact her. Standing beneath the lights of the hotel entrance, Daniel found himself staring into the cool Boston night with an unfamiliar feeling. For the first time in years, someone had walked away from him without wanting anything at all. And somehow, that made him want to find her even more. A week passed before Daniel Whitmore finally found the bookstore. The search had been far more difficult than he expected. He could have asked assistants to locate Ava Richardson within minutes, but something stopped him. He wanted to find her the same way anyone else would. Through patience, through effort, through genuine interest. On a quiet Saturday morning, he turned onto Harbor Street and immediately spotted the storefront. The sign above the entrance was simple: Richardson Books. Large windows displayed carefully arranged novels, children's books, and handwritten staff recommendations. Flower boxes sat beneath the glass, adding warmth to the narrow brick building. It looked nothing like the luxury properties Daniel typically visited. Yet as he stood across the street observing the bookstore, he felt an unexpected sense of anticipation. When he stepped inside, the scent of paper and coffee filled the air. Sunlight streamed through tall windows. Customers browsed shelves while soft music played in the background. Several comfortable chairs surrounded a reading area near the front of the store. Everything about the place felt welcoming, genuine, real. Daniel noticed Ava immediately. She was helping an elderly customer locate a historical biography. Her attention remained completely focused on the conversation. There was no rush in her manner, no impatience. She treated the customer as though nothing else in the world required her attention. Daniel waited quietly. Eventually, Ava looked up and noticed him standing near the entrance. Surprise briefly crossed her face. Then she smiled. "Well," she said, "you actually found the place." Daniel approached. "I hope that is not a problem." "Not at all." Her smile widened slightly. "I just did not expect you to look. You disappeared. I left, without leaving a number. That was intentional." Daniel laughed. "I suspected as much." Ava gestured toward a small cafe area in the corner. "Coffee. I would like that." A few minutes later, they sat at a small wooden table overlooking the bookstore. Customers moved quietly between shelves while children gathered near a reading corner where volunteers prepared for a weekend literacy program. Daniel found himself watching the scene with genuine admiration. "You built all this?" he asked. Ava nodded. "Over several years." "It is impressive." "Thank you." Daniel smiled. "Most people show me balance sheets when they want to impress me." Ava stirred her coffee. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Then maybe stop spending time with people who are trying to impress you." Daniel laughed again. He could not remember the last time a conversation felt this effortless. Over the following weeks, he returned regularly. Sometimes he bought books. Sometimes they discussed literature. Sometimes they simply shared coffee. Between customers. What surprised Daniel most was how little Ava seemed interested in his wealth. When he mentioned a major acquisition one afternoon, she responded by recommending a novel. When newspapers praised one of his business achievements, she asked whether he had finished the book she suggested. For perhaps the first time in years, Daniel felt valued for who he was rather than what he owned. And slowly, without either of them acknowledging it aloud, something began to grow between them. Customers noticed. Employees noticed. Even regular visitors smiled knowingly when Daniel appeared. Yet neither rushed the connection. It developed through conversations, trust, and quiet moments shared among shelves filled with stories. What neither realized was that outside the peaceful walls of the bookstore, another story was beginning to unfold. And unlike the gentle chapters they were writing together, this one would soon attract far more attention than either of them wanted. Autumn arrived quietly in Boston, painting Harbor Street with shades of gold and amber. Inside Richardson Books, life continued much as it always had. Customers browsed shelves. Children gathered for weekend reading sessions. Volunteers organized literacy programs. To Ava Richardson, the bookstore remained a peaceful refuge from the noise of the outside world. Unfortunately, the outside world had begun paying attention. It started with a photograph. One Saturday afternoon, a local blogger captured an image of Daniel Whitmore carrying a stack of books as he left the bookstore beside Ava. Neither of them noticed the camera. Neither thought anything of the moment. But by Monday morning, the photograph had spread across social media. Headlines followed quickly. Business publications speculated about the billionaire's mysterious relationship. Entertainment websites filled pages with rumors. Comment sections exploded with opinions from strangers who knew nothing about either of them. Ava first discovered the story when one of her employees approached her holding a phone. "You should probably see this," the young woman said carefully. Ava glanced at the screen and immediately recognized the photograph. Beneath it sat dozens of articles and thousands of comments. Some were harmless. Others were far less kind. For a long moment, Ava simply stared. She had spent years building a quiet life centered around books, community, and meaningful work. Now strangers were discussing her appearance, her motives, and her relationship with a man they had never seen her speak to. That evening, Daniel arrived at the bookstore carrying his usual coffee. The moment he saw Ava's expression, he understood something was wrong. "You saw it," he said. Ava nodded. "Apparently the entire internet has seen it." Daniel placed the coffee on a nearby table. "I am sorry. Why are you apologizing?" "Because this attention comes with my world." Ava looked away briefly. Through the bookstore window, she noticed two people taking photographs from across the street. The sight unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. "I am not angry," she said quietly. "I just was not prepared for any of this." Daniel followed her gaze and noticed the photographers as well. His expression tightened slightly. Neither was I. Over the following weeks, the attention intensified. Reporters occasionally appeared outside the bookstore. Customers asked personal questions. Even some local business owners began treating Ava differently. What troubled her most was not the curiosity. It was the assumption. Many people seemed convinced that her life now revolved around Daniel's success. They ignored everything she had accomplished long before meeting him. One evening after closing, Ava sat alone reviewing inventory reports when Daniel joined her. The bookstore was quiet except for the soft hum of overhead lights. "You have been distant lately," he said gently. Ava sighed. "Maybe I have. Talk to me." She looked at him carefully. "Do you know what bothers me most?" Daniel shook his head. "People think I matter because I know you." The words landed heavily between them. "Ava, I spent years building this place." Her voice remained calm, but emotion lingered beneath every sentence. "Years creating programs, helping families, supporting literacy projects. Yet suddenly, I am being introduced as the woman standing next to Daniel Whitmore." Daniel listened silently. He understood. More than that, he respected her honesty. After several moments, he spoke softly. "For what it is worth, I think people should be introducing me as the man fortunate enough to know Ava Richardson." A faint smile appeared despite her frustration. Yet as they sat together beneath the bookstore lights, neither realized how much more difficult the coming months would become. Because attention had created pressure, and pressure was about to force both of them toward a decision neither wanted to make. The first snow of the season arrived early that year. Light flakes drifted past the bookstore windows, softening the busy streets outside Harbor Street. Inside Richardson Books, everything appeared normal. Customers browsed shelves. Volunteers prepared for weekend reading programs. Children gathered around story tables. Yet beneath the familiar routine, Ava Richardson had reached a decision she had been avoiding for weeks. The attention had not disappeared. If anything, it had grown worse. Reporters continued appearing unexpectedly. Articles continued speculating about her life. Every accomplishment she achieved seemed to be linked to Daniel Whitmore's name rather than her own efforts. More than once, she had overheard strangers describing her bookstore as the billionaire's favorite place instead of the community institution she had spent years building. The unfairness hurt, but the growing pressure concerned her even more. One evening after closing, Ava remained alone in the bookstore long after the last employee had left. She sat beside the reading corner where countless children had discovered their first favorite books. Around her, shelves stood quietly beneath warm lights. In front of her rested a handwritten letter. She stared at it for nearly an hour before finally folding it carefully and placing it inside an envelope. The following morning, Daniel arrived carrying coffee as he often did. A smile appeared automatically when he stepped through the door. He expected to find Ava organizing displays or helping customers. Instead, he found the bookstore manager waiting near the counter. "She asked me to give you this," the woman said softly. Confusion crossed Daniel's face as he accepted the envelope. He opened it immediately. Ava's handwriting filled the page. She thanked him for every conversation they had shared. She thanked him for making her laugh. She thanked him for reminding her that meaningful connections still existed in a complicated world. Then came the sentence that stopped him cold. She believed they needed distance. Not because she cared less, because she cared too much. Ava explained that she could not continue watching the bookstore, her employees, and her community become part of a public story they never asked to join. She had spent years creating something independent and meaningful. She refused to allow it to become overshadowed by endless speculation. Most importantly, she did not want Daniel forced to constantly defend a relationship against people determined to judge it. Daniel read the letter twice before lowering it slowly. For several moments, he simply stood there. The bookstore suddenly felt different. Quieter. Emptier. "Where is she?" he finally asked. The manager shook her head gently. "She asked me not to say." Daniel left shortly afterward and spent the rest of the day unable to focus on anything. Meetings blurred together. Reports went unread. Conversations became background noise. For the first time in many years, a problem existed that could not be solved through influence, resources, or determination. Ava had made a choice, and because he respected her, he knew he could not simply ignore it. That evening, as snow continued falling outside his penthouse windows, Daniel found himself rereading the letter. Every word reflected the same qualities he admired most about her: strength, integrity, dignity. Yet none of those qualities made the loss hurt less. Standing alone beneath the city lights, he realized something he had not allowed himself to fully admit before. Somewhere between coffee conversations, bookstore visits, and quiet afternoons among the shelves, Ava Richardson had become the most important person in his life. And now she was gone. Winter passed. Spring arrived. Then summer followed. Nearly a year slipped by after Ava Richardson left without saying goodbye in person. During that time, Daniel Whitmore accomplished everything the business world expected of him. His company completed its largest acquisition in history. Financial magazines placed him on their covers. Industry leaders praised his vision. Investors celebrated record growth. From the outside, his life appeared more successful than ever. Yet success had become strangely quiet. Every achievement seemed to arrive without meaning. Every victory felt incomplete. The celebrations ended, the interviews concluded, and the applause faded. What remained was an emptiness he could no longer ignore. More than once, Daniel found himself driving toward Harbor Street without thinking. Each time, he slowed as he approached the bookstore. Each time, he saw the same familiar sign above the entrance. Each time, he kept driving. The letter Ava left behind remained folded inside the top drawer of his desk. He had read it so many times that he nearly knew every word by heart. One afternoon, after concluding a major corporate presentation, Daniel found himself surrounded by executives congratulating him on another successful quarter. Smiles filled the room. Hands were shaken. Plans for future expansion were discussed enthusiastically. Yet while everyone around him celebrated, his thoughts drifted elsewhere. He remembered a small wooden table near a bookstore window. He remembered conversations about novels and community projects. He remembered feeling understood. Later that evening, he attended a formal dinner hosted by several influential investors. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath elegant lighting. The menu featured dishes prepared by renowned chefs. Guests spoke confidently about wealth, influence, and opportunity. At one point, someone raised a toast in Daniel's honor. The room applauded. Daniel smiled politely. But deep inside, a question continued repeating itself. If this was success, why did it feel so lonely? Across town, life continued moving forward for Ava as well. The bookstore remained open. Literacy programs expanded. New customers arrived every week. Outwardly, she appeared content. Yet there were quiet moments when memories resurfaced unexpectedly. A book recommendation, a familiar song, a passing conversation about business leaders. Small reminders of a chapter she had deliberately closed. Neither of them spoke about the separation. Neither reached out. Both honored the choice that had been made. Yet neither completely escaped it. One Saturday morning, Daniel found himself cleaning his apartment, something he rarely did personally. While sorting through old papers, he discovered a receipt tucked inside a novel Ava had recommended long ago. The receipt came from a small cafe located across from the bookstore. On the back, written in Ava's handwriting, were 4 simple words. Stories matter because people matter. Daniel stared at the note for a long time. Then he sat down beside the window overlooking Boston Harbor. For nearly an hour, he thought about everything that had changed over the previous year. The companies, the investments, the headlines. None of those memories carried the emotional weight of a single afternoon spent talking with Ava among shelves filled with books. For the first time, he stopped asking whether he could move on. The answer had become obvious. He could not. More importantly, he no longer wanted to. As the summer sun began setting beyond the harbor, Daniel folded the small note carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Somewhere in the city, Ava Richardson was continuing her life without him. But for the first time in nearly a year, Daniel realized something important. The story between them did not feel finished. And deep within his heart, a decision had finally begun to form. The decision that formed in Daniel Whitmore's heart during that summer evening refused to disappear. Days passed, yet the feeling remained. For nearly a year, he had respected Ava Richardson's choice. He had honored her request for distance. He had convinced himself that time would eventually erase what he felt. Instead, time had only clarified it. The truth was simple. He loved her, not the idea of her, not the memory of her, her. And if there was even a small chance that their story was not finished, he could no longer sit quietly and wonder. Early, one Saturday morning, Daniel returned to Harbor Street for the first time in months. The neighborhood looked much the same as he remembered. Families walked along the sidewalks. Small businesses welcomed weekend customers. The familiar scent of coffee drifted through the air. Yet when he reached the bookstore, he stopped in surprise. The windows were covered with paper. The sign had been removed. For a brief moment, his heart sank. Then he noticed a notice taped to the door. Richardson Books had relocated to a larger location several miles away near the waterfront district. Daniel stared at the address before a smile slowly appeared. Ava had not disappeared. She had grown. 20 minutes later, he arrived at the new location. The building was larger and brighter than the original store. Tall windows overlooked the harbor. Families moved in and out carrying books. Children gathered around outdoor reading tables. The atmosphere felt vibrant and alive. Everything reflected Ava's vision on a grander scale. Daniel stepped inside. For several seconds, he simply stood there, taking it all in. Then he saw her. Ava was helping a young customer select a novel near the center of the store. Sunlight streamed through the windows behind her. She looked almost exactly the same. Yet there was something new in her posture. A quiet confidence earned through growth and accomplishment. As though she had fully stepped into the future she once imagined. Ava looked up. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, neither moved. Surprise filled her expression. Then uncertainty. Then something softer. Daniel slowly approached. "Hello, Ava." She stared at him for a second before smiling faintly. "Hello, Daniel." The simplicity of the greeting somehow carried an entire year inside it. "This place is beautiful," he said. Ava glanced around the bookstore. "Thank you. You did all this?" "With a lot of help from very good people." Daniel nodded. "I am proud of you." The words were sincere. Ava could hear it immediately. For a moment, neither knew what to say next. Finally, Ava gestured toward a reading area overlooking the harbor. "Would you like some coffee?" Daniel smiled. "I would." An hour. Later, they sat beside the large windows, talking as though no time had passed. They discussed books, community projects, and the changes that had filled the previous year. Yet beneath every conversation lingered the truth neither had addressed. Eventually, silence settled between them. Ava looked toward the harbor outside. "Why now?" she asked quietly. Daniel considered the question carefully. "Because I spent a year trying to convince myself I could move on." Ava turned toward him. "And?" Daniel met her eyes. "I was wrong." The honesty in his voice left no room for misunderstanding. Ava lowered her gaze briefly. A gentle smile appeared despite herself. For the first time since they reunited, hope quietly entered the room. Neither knew exactly what would happen next. But as sunlight danced across the harbor beyond the windows, both felt the same thing. The story they thought had ended was beginning again. Over the next several months, Daniel Whitmore and Ava Richardson slowly rebuilt what had once been lost. Neither pretended the separation had never happened. Neither rushed toward promises or certainty. Instead, they chose something stronger. Honesty. Daniel visited the bookstore regularly, but now the visits carried a different sense of purpose. He was no longer searching for answers. He was building trust again. Together, they hosted literacy events, attended community fundraisers, and spent quiet afternoons discussing books beside the harbor windows. For a time, life felt surprisingly peaceful. Then reality returned. One Monday morning, Daniel entered a board meeting at Whitmore Global and immediately sensed tension in the room. Several directors avoided eye contact. Others exchanged uneasy glances. By the end of the meeting, the reason became clear. The company was preparing for a major international merger worth billions of dollars. Investors wanted stability, predictability, control. Unfortunately, some of them viewed Daniel's renewed relationship with Ava as a potential distraction. At first, the criticism remained subtle. A few comments during meetings, suggestions from consultants, carefully worded concerns from advisors. But as negotiations progressed, the pressure intensified. One evening, a senior board member requested a private conversation. The man had worked with Daniel for years. "I am speaking as a friend," he said carefully. "Then speak honestly." The director sighed. "Some investors are nervous." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "About what?" "About the attention." Daniel immediately understood. "You mean Ava?" The man nodded. "The merger is important." Daniel remained silent. "People are worried the relationship could create unnecessary headlines." Daniel looked out the office window toward the city skyline. "And what exactly are they suggesting?" The answer arrived after a long pause. "They believe distancing yourself would simplify things." For several moments, neither man spoke. Finally, Daniel smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had suddenly gained complete clarity. "Interesting. Daniel, do they understand what they are asking?" The director lowered his eyes. "I think they do." But Daniel knew they did not. Because if they truly understood, they would never have asked. Later that evening, Daniel drove directly to the bookstore. Ava immediately sensed something was wrong. They sat together beside the familiar window overlooking the harbor as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the water. "What happened?" she asked gently. Daniel explained everything. He spoke calmly, but Ava could hear the frustration beneath every word. When he finished, silence settled between them. Finally, Ava looked down at her coffee. "Maybe they have a point." Daniel stared at her. "Do not do that. Daniel, do not decide for me." Ava looked up. "I am trying to protect you." Daniel shook his head. "That is exactly what you said before you left." The words hung heavily in the air. Ava said nothing. Daniel reached across the table and gently took her hand. "I spent a year learning what life looks like without you in it." His voice softened. "I am not interested in repeating that lesson." Emotion filled Ava's eyes. Outside, evening lights reflected across the harbor. Inside, two people sat quietly holding hands while the future waited for them both. For the first time, Daniel understood. The choice standing before him. It was no longer about business. It was no longer about public opinion. It was about deciding what truly mattered. And deep within his heart, the answer had already been made. The annual Global Leadership Summit attracted some of the most influential business figures in the country. Investors, executives, journalists, and political leaders filled the grand conference hall overlooking Boston Harbor. For months, speculation had surrounded Whitmore Global and its upcoming merger. Financial networks discussed projections. Analysts debated strategy. Yet on the morning of the final presentation, many attendees seemed just as interested in another question. What would Daniel Whitmore do? Backstage, advisors reviewed talking points one final time. The merger documents were ready. Shareholders were watching. Every word mattered. One executive approached Daniel quietly. "There is still time to avoid unnecessary controversy." Daniel looked up from his notes. "Meaning?" The man hesitated. "Keep the focus on business." Daniel nodded politely, but inside he felt an unexpected calm. For the first time in years, he knew exactly what mattered. When his name was announced, the audience rose in applause. Daniel walked confidently onto the stage. Bright lights illuminated the room. Cameras focused on him from every angle. For nearly 30 minutes, he discussed the future of the company, economic opportunities, innovation, and growth. The audience listened carefully. Investors nodded approvingly. Everything proceeded exactly as expected. Then came the question and answer session. A journalist stood near the front of the room. "Mr. Whitmore, there has been considerable public discussion regarding your personal relationship and whether it could affect future business decisions. Would you like to respond?" The room immediately grew quiet. Some executives lowered their eyes. Others exchanged nervous glances. This was the moment many had anticipated. Daniel paused briefly before stepping away from the podium. "Yes," he said, "I would." The silence deepened. "Over the past year, many people have offered opinions about my life. Some have questioned my judgment. Others have suggested that certain relationships create unnecessary complications." He looked across the audience. "I understand those concerns. What I do not understand is why respect, integrity, and love are sometimes treated as liabilities." Several reporters quickly began taking notes. Daniel continued. "There is a woman who owns a bookstore in this city. She has dedicated years of her life to improving her community, supporting literacy programs, and helping young people discover opportunities through education." A faint smile appeared on his face. "She has accomplished those things through hard work, compassion, and character, long before she ever met me." Across town, Ava Richardson watched the broadcast from her office inside the bookstore. Employees and volunteers gathered nearby. No one spoke. "Some people believe success is measured by influence, wealth, or status," Daniel continued. "I spent much of my life believing the same thing. Then I met someone who taught me a different definition." His voice remained calm, but every word carried conviction. "The strongest people are not always the loudest. The most valuable contributions are not always the most visible. And the best decisions are not always the easiest." The audience remained completely silent. If anyone believes I should walk away from someone I love in order to make other people comfortable, then they fundamentally misunderstand both leadership and loyalty. For the first time, applause began somewhere near the back of the room. Then another section joined. And another. Within seconds, hundreds of people were standing. Daniel smiled softly, not because of the applause, but because he finally felt free. Hundreds of miles of pressure seemed to disappear at once. Back inside the bookstore, tears filled Ava's eyes. She understood exactly what Daniel had done. He had not defended himself. He had chosen her. Publicly. Completely. Without hesitation. And as the applause continued echoing through the conference hall, both of them knew their lives were about to change forever. 3 years later, the Harbor District had become one of the most beloved parts of the city. Families visited. Every weekend. Students gathered for reading programs. Teachers partnered with community initiatives that had expanded far beyond anything Ava Richardson once imagined. The bookstore overlooking the water had grown into something larger than a business. It had become a place where people felt welcome, a place where stories connected lives. On a bright Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the large windows while laughter filled the building. Children moved between shelves searching for new adventures. Volunteers prepared for an afternoon literacy event. Near the entrance, a framed photograph captured a special moment from years earlier. It showed Ava standing beside Daniel Whitmore during the grand opening of the new bookstore. Customers often paused to admire it. What many of them did not know was how much courage had been required to reach that moment. In the years following Daniel's public declaration, many things had changed. The merger succeeded. Whitmore Global continued growing. Investors eventually focused on results rather than rumors. The headlines faded. The speculation disappeared. Life moved forward. More importantly, Daniel and Ava built something together that neither could have created alone. Their relationship was never based on wealth or status. It was built on respect, trust, friendship, and the willingness to choose one another repeatedly, even when doing so was difficult. Late that afternoon, Daniel entered the bookstore carrying a box of newly donated books. Several children immediately ran toward him. He laughed as they eagerly asked what stories he had brought this time. Ava watched from across the room with a smile she no longer tried to hide. Even now, after everything they had experienced, seeing him there still made the world feel a little brighter. Eventually the crowd settled and the event concluded. As evening approached, the bookstore grew quiet. Golden sunlight reflected across the harbor outside. Ava finished organizing a display while Daniel closed several boxes near the reading area. For a few peaceful moments, neither spoke. They simply enjoyed the silence together. "Do you ever think about that gala?" Daniel asked. Unexpectedly, Ava smiled. "The one where I left without giving you my phone number? That is the one." She laughed softly. "Sometimes." Daniel walked closer. "You made my life very complicated." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Your life was already complicated." "Fair point." They both laughed. Then silence returned. Comfortable. Familiar. The kind that only exists between people who truly know one another. Daniel gently reached for her hand. "You know," he said quietly, "for years I believed success meant building the biggest company possible." Ava squeezed his hand. "And now?" Daniel glanced around the bookstore. The shelves. The reading tables. The community they had helped create. Then he looked back at her. "Now I know success looks a lot like this." Emotion warmed Ava's eyes. Outside, the harbor shimmered beneath the setting sun. Inside, everything felt peaceful. Complete. Daniel gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Ava smiled. Then, surrounded by the place that had changed both of their lives, she leaned forward and shared a tender kiss with the man who had chosen love over fear, loyalty over pressure, and purpose over appearances. When they finally pulled apart, neither spoke. They did not need to. Beyond the windows, evening lights slowly appeared across the water. Inside the bookstore, two people stood together in the life they had built, knowing that the greatest story either of them would ever be part of was not found on any shelf. It was the one they had written together.